right, well, let's get started. We have a lot to cover today and want to make the most of our time. So welcome to EIHR's 2023 Fall Webinar Series, Voices of Children and Youth. I'm Kim Klett, the Deputy Executive Director of the Educators Institute for Human Rights. We're happy to see so many of you joining us today. And if you haven't already, please feel free to put where you are joining us from in the chat box. I would like to begin by telling you just a little bit about EIHR, taking lessons from the Holocaust and other historic human rights violations. EIHR develops teaching materials, convenes training workshops and summits, and supports educator networks to give secondary students a deeper understanding of how egregious conflicts arise and evolve, how justice is served, and most importantly, how we can prevent future atrocities. And here's our executive director, Kate English, with a request.
Thanks so much, Kim. And thank you to all the panelists who are here today, but especially thank you if you're here as an attendee and a participant. We make these sessions just for you, and we're so glad that you can be with us live. The webinars are free of charge, and we get donations from friends like you that allow us to provide this and other programs. So I'd ask if you would please consider making a donation as you're able. And it's pretty simple. It's eihr.org/donate. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. And I wanted to also mention that this year's theme for our webinar series was voted on by our viewers, and we're excited to bring you a rich variety of speakers. It is often said that a society can be measured by the way it treats its weakest members, and that often includes children. We want to bring that focus in this series and not only bring awareness, but also look at ways that you can get involved. We will be putting the links for November and December webinars in the chat box and hope that you'll be able to register for the whole series. November 12th, we will be joined by Sarah Cohan, who will discuss Armenian children, both historically and today. December 5th, we will feature the War Childhood Museum in Sarajevo, which will share new lessons they have created on children, war, and artifacts. Looking ahead to next year, I just want to give a sneak peek for January 14th, when we will be joined by author and artist Nora Krug, who has a new book coming out just this week on children in Ukraine. And again, I will send all of these links mentioned today in the whole program in a follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow, along with a recording of today's program. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land where EIHR's office resides. EIHR respectfully acknowledges the Piscataway and Nacotchtank or Anacostan people and the elders both past and present throughout the generations who have stewarded the land where EIHR gathers. And now I will introduce today's webinar, Censorship, an Assault on a Child's Right to Learn, and our moderator, EIHR Board President, John Heffernan. John is the president of the Foundation for Systemic Change. He has over 30 years of experience in development, human rights, rule of law, democracy and governance, humanitarian relief, and post-conflict reconstruction projects in the U.S., Africa, South America, Asia, and Europe. He has served as executive director of Robert F. Kennedy's Human Rights Speak Truth to Power, director of the Genocide Prevention Initiative at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where he established the Genocide Prevention Task Force, senior investigator with Physicians for Human Rights, chief of party for the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs in Guyana, South America, founder and executive director of the Coalition for International Justice, and country representative for the former Yugoslavia and Sudan for the International Rescue Committee. He was trained as a community organizer by Fred Ross. He serves as a board chair for Disability Rights International and is on the board of Social Documentary Network. Thank you, John, so much for moderating. And I just want to mention as a last point, if you have any questions during the program today, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll be sure that those are addressed. So John, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Kim, and thanks, Kate, and welcome to all our panelists and all of you out there all over the world. before I introduce the panelists, I thought I'd just tell you real quickly about the evolution of the Right to Learn Coalition, which is being sponsored by Educators Institute for Human Rights. It really emerged as a result of my fellow board members and people with whom we all have worked with for many, many years, being concerned about what was happening in the education space here in the US, and seeing that teachers and educators are consistently being restricted in terms of what they can teach. So we as an organization thought, what can we do? And so we reached out to a number of our partners and our friends and said, what can we as a human rights organization do to address this problem, to combat this toxic atmosphere that's hurting ultimately our kids and our democracy writ large. So we formed the Right to Learn Coalition, of which we have, I think, about 25 members at this point. And what we seek to do is to build this collective counterpower to, as I said, to equip educators, librarians, and others to combat the disinformation that we're experiencing across the country in school boards and communities that you've heard about over and over again. Our aim is really to break down the silos and to bring together disparate organizations and to create this hub, if you will, where we can share information. And as I said, and create tools that educators can use to combat, as I said, this disinformation. So again, I welcome you all to our kickoff series our initial webinar series, a conversation about censorship. And we have an incredible panel. All of them are representing organizations that are part of our coalition. And to start off with, I'm just going to introduce real quickly, we have Peter Bromberg. Peter has over 30 years of library experience, including stints as a teen librarian, a law librarian at the EPA, an advocate for libraries and local, state, and national levels. As associate director for EveryLibrary, he provides pro bono consulting to librarians, boards, associations, ballot committees, and grassroots community groups, helping them to fight the censorship that we're talking about today through the use of effective messaging and political strategies to build coalitions and community support. As executive director of the Salt Lake City Library from 2016 to 2021, Peter was honored with the Distinguished Service Award for the American Society of Public Administration. Peter, welcome. Next, we have Dick Iannuzzi, Richard Iannuzzi. Dick, an old friend, welcome. Dick taught elementary school for 34 years. My hat goes off to you, Dick. And in 2004, he was elected vice president, and in 2005, president of New York State United Teachers, NYSUT, the largest state teacher federation in the United States. He held the office in 2014. Dick also served as vice president of the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, and the New York State AFL-CIO. He has held leadership roles in the National Education Association, NEA, and co-chaired the New York State Labor Religion Coalition. He's been the recipient of numerous education and labor honors. Dick currently serves as a trustee for the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, where he continues to collaborate with curriculum issues. He serves as vice chair of ALS Ride for Life, a leading ALS not-for-profit in Long Island, New York. Sumi Cho. Sumi, welcome. Sumi came out of retirement to serve as the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the African American Policy Forum. Prior to joining AAPF, she taught critical race theory and race, racism, and U.S. law for 25 years, along with other traditional law classes at DePaul University College of Law in Chicago. In 2017, she was awarded the university's highest excellence in teaching award. She speaks nationally on issues of affirmative action, sexual harassment, intersectionality, multiracial politics, coalitions, and critical theory. Professor Cho is cited extensively for her scholarship on critical race theory and intersectionality. Welcome, Sumi. And we have LaTayna here. Oh, hi, LaTayna. How are you? LaTayna is the Human Rights Campaign Foundation's Associate Director of Welcoming Schools. She has over 25 years of experience in education and nonprofit organizations and has worked as a K-16 educator and administrator in schools, colleges, and youth-serving nonprofits. She first joined Welcoming Schools as the national facilitator to help learning environments that are safe and affirming for all students before joining the team as associate director. LaTayna brings a passion for working towards racial justice and affirming LGBTQ plus youth to this role. Her current interests lie on the intersection of spirituality and justice as she looks to create spaces of inclusion to belong to youth-serving communities. Welcome, LaTayna. And next, and we have Trey Walk. Trey is a democracy researcher and advocate for Human Rights Watch's U.S. program. In this role, Trey documents and challenges threats to voting rights, access to truthful information, and civic engagement, and he collaborates with movements working to promote robust multiracial democracy in the U.S. Trey came to HRW from the Groundwork Project, where he managed the commitment over $2 million of grant funding to grassroots community organizations in Alabama, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. He also developed an advocacy training and capacity building support for civic leaders in these states. Prior to Groundwork, Trey was the project manager at Equal Justice Initiative, where he facilitated EJI's Community Remembrance Project. Trey was a researcher and educator for EJI's public history projects that link mass incarceration and the history of racial injustice to the U.S. Wow. Welcome, all of you. This is just an incredible panel, and we're so pleased that you're joining us on this Sunday afternoon. To set the stage here, I just want to start by asking you all to think about the general landscape and where you're working in the issue of censorship, in the issue of educators being restricted about what they can teach. And I'm going to start with you, Peter. If you could just give us sort of the general landscape from the library perspective, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks so much, John, and thanks to you and everyone at EIHR for sponsoring this and inviting me to be here today. And nice to meet everyone on the panel. So what we're seeing across the country right now is that book ban numbers are increasing. We can see this from PEN America does a great job with these numbers. And what we're seeing is a shift to increasingly attacking books and challenging books and banning books in public libraries. This is being framed, of course, as parental rights and protecting children, without really defining like which parents and protecting children from what. We're seeing also very concerning that there's efforts to defund public libraries generally for having materials on the shelves that are have authors or voices from the LGBTQIA plus perspective. We're seeing this in Michigan, Illinois, Missouri, Wyoming, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Washington, Alabama, Virginia. It's spreading. And we are catching up a little bit. The other side, as it were, is organized. They've been showing up and speaking up loudly. And we're catching up with them. What we're finding is that as we're helping to organize grassroots groups and give them tools and some training around how to show up and speak up effectively, we are seeing books starting to go back on the shelf. But there's still a lot of work to do in building political power in our local communities and states. At the state level, last year we tracked over 145 bills that enabled book challenges. We saw them pass in Florida, Texas, Utah, where I am, in Idaho, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Iowa, Louisiana, as well as educational gag orders, so-called, right? And we're expecting to see those again as we ramp up into, many of the legislatures will kick off in January. We're already seeing bills pre-filed. And towards the 2024 election, we're going to probably see more of this rhetoric, particularly in states that are heavily gerrymandered, particularly for Republicans. We just saw Jeff Landry win as governor in Louisiana, and he actually set up a tip line to tattle on teachers and librarians to report things being said, taught, shared in schools and libraries that he found inappropriate. And so this is very concerning. He kind of ran against libraries and ran against education and won. And the last thing I'll say is that a concern that I think we all need to be aware of is that this, while it's happening all over the country, I just had a conversation with a number of people doing great work in Wisconsin, and they're specifically targeting swing districts that went blue in the last election to get parents, concerned, riled up, building distrust in public education and libraries as an attempt to try to swing votes. So it's just something that needs to be on our radar. So, that's what I'm seeing from
Great.
myself.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Peter. And you'll all have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you're doing vis-a-vis your organizations to address some of these issues. But for now, Sumi, now give us a little bit of how you see your general landscape in terms of what you're doing.
Well, at the African American Policy Forum, we take history very seriously, and we have to understand that these current attacks on the freedom to learn writ large, we can understand them better when we go back to the racial reckoning of 2020, calling out for the injustices of the murder of Black people that constituted some of the largest protests in U.S. history that we've ever seen throughout that spring and summer of 2020 after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor's murders, for example. And so it was perhaps predictable that in light of that, we saw many corporations and educators, institutions come out and commit to things that they were going to try to do differently to address the legacy of systemic discrimination in the areas that they could. And this obviously ignited profound fear and alarm on the part of people and institutions that did not want that to happen. So we saw a number of right-wing think tanks, the Manhattan Institute, the Heritage Foundation, which not only have opposed many of the, let's say, racial justice reforms, but also public institutions and public education in general that teamed up with political structures, whether it was State Policy Network, ALEC, Goldwater Institute, funded by deep pockets from the far right to develop this legislative mill of copycat legislation that would seek to ban what they called critical race theory. And in short, that's just a way of saying anything that tries to talk about social injustice, that tries to talk about multiracial democracy, that tries to talk about anti-racism, social inequalities. And so what we saw very quickly was this going back to this old playbook of trying to portray anti-racism as anti-white that we saw, actually in the first Reconstruction when President Johnson vetoed our country's first Civil Rights Act by saying these are safeguards that go beyond what government has ever provided for the white race. Okay, so this type of notion that any type of advance on behalf of Blacks, on behalf of civil rights, against racial injustice is anti-white. And we've seen that play out also in the 20th century, in the massive resistance era under the name of states' rights, that has also more contemporarily been revived under Moms for Liberty, talking about parents' rights. And so this is some of the context that we always try to bring forward, that it is part of this larger cycle of what our founder, Kim Crenshaw, has written about as race, reform, and retrenchment. And so we've got to actually, in the name of multiracial democracy, come together and reject this interpretation of anti-racism being anti-white.
Thanks, Sumi. Trey, I know you're recently back from Florida. Tell us what you found down there and just sort of the general landscape.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm glad to be here and glad to share. I focus on democracy issues for human rights, and one of the sort of questions that I've been asked a few times is sort of why do we think about this as being a democracy issue? And I think what's happening in our schools and in our communities, it's a threat to our multiracial democracy. One, because the sort of restricting of information folks have is a pattern of authoritarian leaders to control their hold on power, but it's also the specific content that's being banned in classrooms in Florida and across the country is content that actually motivates people to be civically engaged. There's a long history of Black studies and Black history being used to actually teach people about citizenship. And Sumi laid out some of that history just now, but, you know, we think about things like during Reconstruction or during the Civil Rights Movement, when people would attend freedom schools and they would learn about history, and then they would also learn about, you know, what's on your local ballot and how do you get engaged. And so we're concerned about what's going on, because if you don't allow students to learn about, you know, the causes of racism or the causes of injustice in the society, then they can't become citizens and voters who are willing to, you know, work against those things and create something that's freer. One of the things that's been really inspiring. So we've been in a lot of conversations and partnerships with teachers, parents, community groups, students in Florida, and I got to spend a couple of weeks down there with friends in Jacksonville and in Miami. And I think one of the things that I think is probably under told or under recognized is the movement of people who are working to fight back and to resist things. I think that there are a lot of headlines about folks leaving the state and the sort of chilling effects and the fear in the environment. And I think all of that is true. But one of the things we want to do that we're working with partners there on is trying to show how they're having effective wins. There are a lot of local groups who've done really amazing work in mobilizing parents who aren't typically engaged in civic life to show up at school board meetings and contest book bans. There are educators who are working closely with their teachers unions to make sure that people know, you know, what the actual lines are, rather than, you know, stopping themselves short of that and what they're able to talk about in their classrooms and in their curriculum. There are students who are speaking out, and so we're working closely with them to try to show the different tactics that people can use and different strategies people can use to resist, and make sure that, you know, where the state is failing or trying to prevent students' rights from being upheld, you know, community members can step up and do that in the meantime, while we're kind of working to get policy change. And hopefully Florida, where I think some of these issues are at their, you know, most acute, can provide a little bit of a model for other states. I think if we're able to get some wins there and have people show, you know, here are ways that we are able to protect students in Florida, where it's sort of the most intense, maybe that'll inspire folks in other states. So that's what we're up to at the moment.
Great, thanks, Trey. This is a nice segue to you, Dick, who, as I mentioned, taught school for 34 years and was also the president of the New York State United Teachers for the largest teachers union in the country. So tell us about what the unions are doing to address this issue, Dick. Just sort of a general landscape, you know, view of both NEA and AFT and how they're addressing.
Sure. Well, thank you. Great to be part of the panel. Yeah, I think that is a very important point. I think that unions are going to be in the middle of this now, and mostly because collective action is probably the most significant way to respond to this kind of behavior. It's important to hear, like, Peter's perspective and the way we deal with things in a particular classroom, but unions have a larger picture here. And I think both national unions and in states that are very well organized, such as New York and Illinois, it's more on the ground and easier to do. But the reality is you have the need to protect the teacher in a particular classroom, and you also have the larger issue, which again, I've heard from the other panelists, which is we're looking at an attack on democracy. We're looking at censorship as no more than a coercive way of preventing people from participating in the democratic process. Unions know very well. You start with the book bans, and you start with preventing people from reading, and then the next step is you prevent people from organizing and belonging to organizations such as unions. So from the union perspective, we're being careful to look at both the micro in terms of how organizations like Peter help us deal with particular classrooms or particular libraries, but also concentrating on the larger human rights issues, which are issues about the principles of free speech and the principles of democracy.
Thanks, Dick. LaTayna, how do you see this from your context?
Yeah, so one of the ways in which my role is actually looking at how to educate educators to really provide support and partnership. We partner with NEA and AFT and all of National Association of Independent Schools to really kind of get this out to where teachers feel safe to present the information, especially from the perspective of the LGBTQ plus community. So what we're seeing is much of what everyone has already talked about, but it is really kind of acutely present in with our LGBTQ plus students of color and staff of color. And so how do we make sure that we ensure that they are actually able to present this information in a safe manner to where it protects their licenses, it protects them providing this information to our students, as well as protects those students so that when they get that information, they feel empowered to really kind of make that next step. So, again, couching this in the parents' rights and it's about, protecting our children is really kind of a struggle for us in many ways, because what is that protection entail and who is it for? As Peter said at the beginning, who are we protecting them, or what are we protecting them from, I guess is probably a better way of putting it. And so we're trying to equip our teachers on being able to navigate around, depending on what your state policies are, as best as can, as well, and provide the information, but also staying within the parameters of the essence of what we want to do. We want to make sure that our students are getting that history, because it's not just history about the LGBTQ community, it's also about slavery. It's also about all these critical thinking skills that we actually need to have our students to have to make them thrive in the future and to help us as a country thrive as a country. And without that, I think we're going to lose some ground on that.
Yeah, no, thanks, LaTayna. It makes me think about the title of this discussion, the assault of a child's right to learn. And we've heard all examples of this here. But I'd love to hear from you all, and many of you are former teachers or present teachers or were involved in education writ large. Just how do you see, what has been the impact on the child's right to learn? Anybody?
Let me, if I'm going to do a very quick example for you, and then everybody, I think, will be able to build off that. So my daughter is also a teacher, and what's developed in the district where she teaches is if you're a secondary English teacher and something comes up and it strikes you that this piece of literature or this quote from this great person should be right now in this lesson, the answer is no. It needs to first be sent across the street to administration to be cleared before you include it in that lesson. Now, the argument from administration is, well, it's to be cleared so we could protect you if there's any criticism. The reality is what happens is it takes the initiative away from teachers. Well, when you do that, you take the initiative away from the teaching process and the ability to develop critical thinkers. So from a practical point of view, that's what's occurring on the ground, and it's very troubling.
Let me add to that with another story involving my son about how these book bans impact our youth, or could impact our youth. So my father sadly passed away before my twins were born, but my son loved hearing stories about him and the challenges that he faced growing up in Korea under occupation and colonialism during World War II and the Korean War, before he came to the United States. So when he was in 4th grade, my son discovered this book titled When My Name Was Kyoko by Linda Sue Park that told a similar story of a girl growing up under such conditions in Korea that my father had grown up under. And that book spurred my son's intense interest in World War II history and later 20th century global conflict. While he was an undergraduate, during an internship, he co-authored a book on the history of World War II in Burma. And he went on to win the Phi Beta Kappa undergraduate award just last spring, and he was just funded, to write a second book on Chinese, basically the Pacific War during World War II. And when I asked him what started his fascination with World War II, he said it was Linda Sue Park's book. I was appalled to find her name among the list of banned authors on the PEN America Index. And this is the exact type of injury that banning books actually present to our young people, to take away and deprive them of that gift of self-discovery, to be able to explore their own interests, to develop their passions, to find stories that allow them to situate themselves within their families and communities in the world in which they live. And that's the threat of book banning that, we are currently confronting. And we are the majority who oppose book bans. We have to remember 71% of Americans, including 70% of Republicans and 75% of Democrats, oppose book banning. And the people promoting these are a tiny minuscule. In Florida, about of 1,100 challenged books in that state, which leads the country, 700 come from one county, Clay County, and the majority of those 600 come from two people, a Clay County father and a Pensacola high school teacher. Okay, so just think about that and what it says, that such a small minority can prevent all of us from being able to access books.
So that begs the question, what are we doing wrong? I mean, if 70% of this country supports the right thing, and yet such a small minority is having such an incredible impact, what can we do to turn that around?
Well, John, if I can take a crack at that, I mean, you frame it as what are we doing wrong? And I think, we're playing catch up, but I think the numbers of Americans who support us and who oppose book banning, I mean, the American Family Survey that was put out by Deseret News and Brigham Young University, which is, part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is not a liberal poll, found that only 16% of people believe that public school libraries include inappropriate books at all. Only 12% believe that a book should be removed if a parent objects. So that's good news for us, that the vast majority of Americans are on our side. So we have to play catch up, but we have a great field to do that, right? And so what EveryLibrary is doing, as I know many other organizations as well, is we're making contact with local stakeholders. We have a platform called fightforthefirst.org that we provide free to anyone that it's an organizing platform integrated that has petitions, events, you can have groups, etc. And EveryLibrary puts money behind digital marketing to get petitions out there in local communities that helps people to build a list of supporters quickly. And we're doing this across the country right now. So I think we have 60 different groups. But what's typical is someone reaches out to us, or we reach out to someone because we see a news story and we say, hey, we can support you. Whether it's 3 people or 30 people, you're now the Concerned Parents Alliance of fill in the blank, right? Get a petition launched within 24 to 48 hours. We can have hundreds, if not thousands, of people sign that petition. And sometimes there's some misunderstanding around the petition. We don't want to, hand this over to the council to say, see how many people. This is about building a list of supporters quickly, right? And now we can activate people to show up and speak up. Now the leaders of these local community alliances can say, hey, the board meeting's Thursday night. This is on the agenda. Here's the talking points. And of course, this also is how we build political power locally as well as statewide, with an eye down the road towards the elections of school boards, of public library boards, of city and county councils. That ultimately we've seen some boards being taken over, and people are getting elected or appointed to the board specifically to ban books or to defund libraries or make it more difficult for students to access materials in schools. So when we build this list of a few thousand people, within that list is our bench of people who can either run for those seats, or someone who steps up to run now has a built-in list of supporters, right? So that's what we have to do, and we're doing that increasingly now on bringing many of these groups that are working independently in the local communities together into statewide coalitions. We're doing that hand in hand with Penn America and with many other groups as well. So yes, it's bad news that that we're playing catch up, but the good news is again that the people are on our side, and we just have to help them become aware and give them the tool and the messaging to get activated.
Yeah, no, great. That's good to know, Peter. Before I give you all, an opportunity to talk a little bit more about what you're doing in this space, I wanted to give LaTayna and Trey an opportunity to talk about any type of stories that you may have that relate to, kids actually being impacted by this.
I have tons of stories to tell, but I won't go into all of them. But the thing that really is been highlighted to us, especially this past few years, is it is the entire LGBTQ plus community that's being impacted, but it's especially our transgender individuals that are really kind of taking the heat more so than the others, and that's concerning to us because that's a group that really needs the most support. And so one of the things that we really highlight when we're talking about this is that if we aren't supporting these students, if we aren't educating these students, if we are censoring them to understand the broader world and how they fit into it, then we are, in a sense, enhancing suicides, enhancing self-harm. And so it's more about a life and death for especially our community, but especially about our transgender community, more so than we've ever seen before. And if we continue to do, and it's not just our students, it's also our staff members and others who are impacted by this. And so when we take that out, we take that learning out, we limit what the world that they can see and the world that they can to understand how they too fit. They too are affirmed and they too belong. And I think that that's really the key to it. So could I give you stories? I could give you tons of stories about that. But I think that the impact is pretty much in our faces in many cases because we've seen our transgender youth commit suicide on a much higher level than we had before.
Well said. Trey?
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Homestead in Florida, which is a smaller community outside of Miami. A lot of sort of agricultural workers there, and they're having a town hall where educators and parents and students were able to come. And there were a lot of young people there, a couple college age, and then a lot of seniors and juniors in high school. And we did like these little breakout groups. And one of the students who was a junior was talking about how they were thinking about being an African-American studies major when they went to college, but they didn't know if that would be possible or how that would work because the AP African-American history course was banned for high school. And it's oftentimes like, a kind of pipeline into that major. And I think a lot of folks at the university level are having questions about that. And one of the things we also talked about in the group is how a lot of these young people are learning these concepts and this information in other ways. They're all, very online, very connected. People are learning things through TikTok and YouTube and Instagram. And I think that that's sort of a beautiful thing in a lot of ways, but it's a problem because the state has an obligation to teach this information to the students. They shouldn't have to go to someone on TikTok to learn about the history of their communities. And also, I think it brought up a lot of concerns for me when we were having these conversations. What about if people are getting misinformation online, or what about if people are learning incorrect facts? And so I worry a lot about these young people who are sort of asking questions about what their future is. And do I have to leave this place that raised me, that I love, where my family is, to go get an education? And that's a big part of my kind of personal story, was feeling this need to leave the place that I was from to go get an education. And I don't think when we think about the right to education and a child's right to learn, that shouldn't be a question. You shouldn't have to travel across the country to go get the education that's proper and where you learn about your community. And so I think that's one of the stakes of this too, that there are real kind of cost to our students, not getting this in the places where they're from and where they make their lives.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
I just want to pick up on
encourage-
something that
Yeah.
LaTayna and Trey were mentioning. And I do think that one thing we have to really understand is what these book bans really represent, and these laws that underwrite them, is the desire to take off of the table talking about structural discrimination and structural inequality. And what that does then for young people is to say, we're not going to look at the deficits in society that produce contemporary inequalities. Instead, the strong suggestion is that those deficits are within you, right? You are the problem. And by having that silence, that's naturally what many students are going to pick up, especially those most vulnerable. And that's what LaTayna was underlining, that is so important. And I want to point out first, your response to your last question, John, about how did we get here? I want to emphasize that it's not just the extremists in the red trifecta states that are producing this censorship. We have to be clear that this is also happening by enablers who should know better, that head educational institutions, whether it's the College Board that aligned with Florida's criteria to say, we don't want to teach Black queer studies, we don't want to teach Black feminism, we don't want to teach intersectionality. So we're going to purge those issues from the AP African American Studies course. It's from Scholastic Books. You know, these are billion-dollar corporations, so maybe it's not confusing. But the fact that they created, you know, what Judd Legum called the bigot button to easily make it easy for librarians to delete the LGBTQ and race titles and characters from the otherwise much loved Scholastic book fairs that come to public schools across the country. So we have to be equally clear that this is not just a problem that's coming from the right. You know, it's the ways in which our papers of record, whether it's the New York Times or the Washington Post, you know, in the name of both sidesism, give free rein, you know, to Christopher Rufo, but consider critical race theorists on their op-ed pages to be too close to the topic and the objects who are no longer able to comment. So I think we have a lot of these challenges ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need to be clear that it's not just K-12. It is leaping into our, you know, our colleges and higher ed institutions. And part of it is they actually need to stand up also and say, this is not learning. And this is not education. Especially our education departments around the country need to stand up and say, this is not how we train our teachers to do the job of the profession of teaching. And I think that's sometimes lost, is that this is a profession, that these people are trained to do this well. And so when we take out and we try to censor what they can and can't say and do, then it limits how they are able to do this profession well. And so I think that we have to really kind of also hold our colleges and universities and education departments also a part of that co-conspirating pieces of doing this in limiting what's learning in the schools.
No, absolutely. You know, and it strikes me when you talk about, Sumi, I think you were talking about structural changes and systemic racism and how that's being kind of removed from the equation, and therefore it makes it that more difficult for that child who's getting that misinformation to be an effective advocate. If they don't, you know, focus on systemic change or structural changes because they're told that they're the problem, then how can they, you know, it's just this, yeah, and I hadn't really thought about it that way, but all right, anything else on that? I see that we have 15 minutes. I want to give an opportunity to people on the chat to ask questions, but I also want to, and perhaps you all can think about this, is kind of at the end, the question I posed to you, and many of you have already asked this, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk more about what you and your organizations are doing to address the issues that we've been talking about. But
And
first,
John, we do have, sorry, John, we do
Yeah.
have one question I just wanted to mention, and Trey started to address it earlier. What youth movements are we seeing that are taking action on this issue?
Yeah, yeah. I'll shout out like a few groups in particular that are worth following along. One of the ones that I've been super impressed by, there's a group called Florida Student Power Network. They're very active on social media, and they're working on a few different issues, but have really taken up the banner of kind of giving young people a voice on the education fights. And so I can drop a link in the chat to their information, but I think they're worth following along because they've been, telling the story from a young person's perspective. There are a couple of other groups, Power U, it's mostly in the South Florida area, Dream Defenders, and some others who are working a lot with young people. But I think it's a great point that these discussions, need to have young people in the room because they understand the stakes and they understand the implications of this. They know what it means to be deprived of this history, and are kind of growing up seeing the dissonance between what they're being taught in classrooms and what's happening in the world around them. So I think that voice is really critical. There were some folks a couple years ago, and I regret that I don't remember the names of the groups, but there were folks who were sort of pushing for a student Bill of Rights at the federal level. And there were a lot of young people involved in that movement. And so I think there definitely are young people who are active and speaking out on this issue, and to your point, LaTayna, it continues at the college level, which I think is great because that's when a lot of young people are sort of really coming into their own around like activism and organizing. So I think there's a real opportunity for us there, if we're able to tap into that kind of energy that happens on campuses. If we could find a way to like harness that to help us out at the policy level, I think that's a pathway that's probably hasn't been explored as much as it could be.
Yep. Anybody else on youth-led organizations out there? And I want to put it in a plug for the coalition, because we want to attract youth-led organizations to the coalition. And right now, we really don't have just a few. So please send us names, organizations that we hope can be part of this collective counterpower that we're trying to build. Okay. Kim, did you have another question?
No, that's all we've gotten in so far.
Okay. All right. Well, I see we have about 10 minutes left. So again, I want this to be an opportunity, and a lot of you already talked about it, but really to kind of focus on not only on your own organizations, but other things that are being done out there that we should know about, and what our webinar audience should know, and how we might be able to help as a coalition as well.
Well, I'll start if you'd like, John, just to share. I think there's been a lot of discussion here about how we protect students, children from what's going on. I think after the protect, we need to use awareness to get to the next step, which is how do we prevent and how do we promote the right set of values? How do we promote the principles of democracy? One of the most basic ones I think I've heard every single panelist mention so far, which is, get out to vote and create that voting block, and understand that while we may have 70% of the population opposed to book bans, it's that smaller percent which is being funded and fed by another more extremist bloc that has not just a concern about a particular book or a concern about racism or anti-LGBTQ plus or anti-Semitism, but is really looking to undermine the basic principles of democracy. And I think one of the things that goes on at RFK Human Rights is the Speak Truth to Power program that you were so influential in being part of. And the idea of creating defenders, creating within the minds of young people the ability to understand how to protect human rights, how to promote human rights. I think going forward, when we create that positive view, I think it does a lot to provide the kind of background I think we need young people to have.
Yeah, could I add on to that?
Yeah,
Rich, I really
please.
appreciate that. And I think especially the beginning of what you're saying around offering, thinking about what we actually want and kind of what our vision is. I think one of the things I wanted to make sure to kind of offer in this conversation is that international human rights law, and I know we have folks from other countries on this call, it has a lot to say about the right to education and access to this type of content, about historical injustices, about human rights abuses, about different communities that have been discriminated against. And it's actually quite a good sort of hook for us. The United States has signed on to and ratified these treaties, like the Convention on Racial Discrimination, where it says and spells out explicitly, like, you have to teach, this history of racial injustice in your country. You have to teach about the history of people of African descent. And I think, you have to offer this information in textbooks and in schools. And so I think, taking what we know from transitional justice sort of models, that it's not just enough to end an injustice, but you actually have to talk about it and make sure that people have education about it to prevent it from happening again. That's the language and or the sort of logic behind this being included in the human rights documents, is it talks about how teaching this information can be a way to prevent hate speech and future hate acts. And so, I feel that our movement is sort of on the defensive. And I think that what we could sort of offer instead of, stop banning this book or stop, restricting this being taught in the classroom, is maybe we, continue fighting that battle, but find places where we can actually push even further to say, mandatory or, education around, Black studies, queer studies, intersectionality, these topics that are being banned, civic education, human rights history, and finding places where you can push really hard on that to say, like, this should be offered in every single school to every single student, I think is one of the places that we could go as a movement. Because it's not true that, before this movement picked up in the last few years, that, like, all schools are doing a great job of teaching this information to students. There were a lot of students who weren't getting it before. And so I think, our offensive is to say, no, we want every student to learn this at a really high quality level. And I think we can kind of do both of those at the same time, keep playing the defense, but start thinking about where we want to go.
I guess I'll add to that, because one challenge at AAPF is looking at our bifurcated political society. So we've got 23 states that have enacted anti-CRT laws, and similar number that have enacted Don't Say Gay laws. And what that means is nearly half of our public school children, 22 million, according to the Critical Race Theory Forward Tracking Project at UCLA, are subjected to these bans and restrictions, which is appalling and very disturbing for what it means for the future of our country, education, democracy. And so one challenge that we've got is, how do we think about providing proactively education in these states where such learning is currently banned? So that's, as educators, I think a challenge of creativity and curriculum and delivery. This is something that we had also been demanding that College Board, develop online platforms, to be able to provide the unpurged version of African-American history to students in red states, for example, as one challenge. But also in the blue states.
Let me just interrupt. You mean in a sort of a non-traditional way, how we can creatively get around this so that we can be, someone mentioned, be more offensive in our approach?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So we were demanding that the College Board partner with us and think more creatively, that if instead of just acceding to the censors of the day in a given state, right? That
Yeah.
instead, let's develop a strategy for those states and say, like you did with AP psychology, we're not going to back down. And if you don't take all of it, you don't get any of it. And if you reject it, then we're going to create a free online virtual course that people can have access to that want to learn in that state. You know, unfortunately, they didn't quite take us up with that partnership, but it is the ongoing challenge that we have to think about. And in the blue states, to also push the proactive models like we've seen in California. And I don't mean simply, you know, having measures for school districts or libraries that do ban books. I think that's positive, but it does also still feel reactive. But I mean more in terms of the ethnic studies requirement, you know, in high school education and things like that. So I think that, you know, we have, you know, some of these dueling agendas. One challenge we've been seeing is after all of the various school standards, you know, wars, is many of our federal officials and leaders are hesitant to wade into the field of education because they feel that it's a state and local matter, right? The truce after all of the No Child Left Behind, Every Student Succeeds Act, you know, kind of wars. That's kind of where that ended up. So I think we have to be able to affirmatively state, as we always have with federal civil rights law, exactly what the discrimination and the harm is that requires federal intervention, especially to the most vulnerable members of our community.
Good point. You know, I can't let you go with asking this one question. We're about to enter the 2024 presidential election. And I suspect that this will be part of the discussion, although I don't think it's going to be focused on the way it should be, because I think candidates will have a difficult time answering this in a way that would be attractive to their potential voters. So, you know, it seems to me this is an opportunity for us to really get it on the platforms of the candidates and to really highlight this issue. Are any of your, I assume that your organizations are doing that right now, and if so, tell me a little bit about it. And if not, you know, let's talk offline about that, because I mean, I know, Sumi, we've talked a little bit about this, but this is one of those opportunities, you know, where we can really get, particularly if we have a champion and a candidate that's willing to take this on, where we can get this raised to a higher level.
John, right now, EveryLibrary reached out to all of the major parties to ask them to include an anti-censorship plank in their platform. We've heard back from the Libertarian Party that it advanced a bit and then it was killed, but the Democratic Party actually just passed this with, I think it was about 70 co-sponsors at their meeting in St. Louis about 2 weeks ago. And this looks like we've got a path forward to get this into the Democratic Party platform. And we'll still work with the Libertarians, and we haven't heard back from the Greens or the Republicans, but we hope to. And also we're working on candidate surveys that we can roll out at local and state levels for schools, for governors, for Secretary of States, for, you know, so that we can work with groups either at a local level or at a state level, county level, et cetera, to help them do candidate surveys. Because again, the majority, we have the stats, the majority of people are against this. So we want to get candidates on the record saying, you know, do you support, do you oppose, so that we can get them on the record to hold them accountable down the road, or to help to defeat them if they're not taking the right position. The last thing I just want to mention is that we have to be really careful about not just messaging this with progressive language. We tend to be progressive, and that's our value system. But there's many people in America who are of a libertarian ideology, who just want government to stay the heck out of this and let parents parent, and let you know, like, we don't want to raise snowflakes who can't compete, and conservatives who want to have American strength in the world, and we can talk about, you know, this limits our ability to raise kids who can lead in a diverse global economy, et cetera. So we have to diversify our messaging a little bit to appeal to everybody and build a real coalition of people who can stand with us to achieve the policy objectives we want to achieve. So thank you.
Thanks. LaTayna, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, human rights campaign, one of our arms is basically political, and so that's what we do in that sense. And so we're doing a lot of fighting and on not just this agenda of censorship and education, but all the agendas that support LGBTQ plus inclusivity and support. But I do know that our president is really kind of spearheading that piece in this. We've already said that we're going to support the Democratic Party, and so I know that is one of the platforms that she is pushing to make sure that education is a part of that platform, and it is very front and center in a sense of that. But I do agree with Peter. We do have to diversify our language and diversify how we're getting this out, because even in a blue state, you still have individuals who need to hear this message differently so that we can actually move our agenda ahead.
Yeah, good point. Yep.
And if I could just add on that, John, and to both those points, I think the critical part of this coalition building is that we share common language as we try to move the item forward. So often, and it's probably part of the history of the Democratic Party, you'll have 10 groups moving in the same direction, but with different language and wanting to own the final document. And in the end, all 10 of them fail. So coming through with a united, again, it's collective action. It's now collective action at a higher level, but it's collective action to move forward with a common language and a common set of values that that keep us from, well, self-inflicted wounds in terms of an important issue.
Let me just offer a couple of insights from research that we've actually done with HIT strategies, where we actually have been trying to think about how do we impact effectively going forward, the national stage. And what we found, especially in terms of surveying Black, brown, and white Democrats, is that in focus groups, especially right after the Virginia election, we found that people really wanted our elected officials to take more leadership on these issues of combating injustice, social injustice, racial injustice, and education, and that they were incensed that there was so little that was done in the face of using education and critical race theory as a cudgel, in that particular campaign. And so I think we actually have to be wary of strategies that don't meet people and our base where they're at, and the recognition that Black voters and young voters who care passionately about these issues and LGBTQ voters are going to stay home. And that's a huge threat. We've seen in every single swing state that we've had these key elections in Georgia in terms of taking back the Senate, that if we ignore these and just think that we can go towards the middle, you actually also end up losing in a different way. So we have to come together and figure out how it is that we turn out everywhere that we possibly can without hopefully being at odds with one another.
Yep.
John, I want to acknowledge, I know we're over time, but we had a couple of really good questions, and I had said that we would make sure we address questions. So let me ask the two questions that were in the chat. Michaela's in Connecticut, and she said that their town library has a book challenge process that demands something of the challenger, but also of the staff to engage with them and explain the why of this book program. She said, we've stood our ground, but in the schools, we're hearing that teachers are self-censoring and just kind of keeping their heads down to stay out of trouble. What can they do about that?
Well, I'm going to just start by saying Connecticut is a fairly strong union state. Hopefully, the role of your union is to be there to allow you to teach. And hopefully there's a willingness to move in that direction, and the community could show support for the local union in a way that would strengthen making that argument. So that would be one way to go for the teacher.
I think we have to fully support those teachers who we know have been retaliated against and have lost their jobs entirely, whether that's
Mhm.
Matthew Hahn in Tennessee, whether that's Amy Donofrio in Florida, whether that's Katie Renderly in Georgia, or whether that's James Whitfield in Texas, that we cannot allow these folks to become the victims. We have to stand behind them and make sure that they receive the full support. It is encouraging. For example, in Katie's case, she was not a union member, and yet the union said, we're going to actually support you and provide you with legal support.
Mhm.
And so we have to do things like that. But as a civil society, we also have to be watching these cases and providing them with hope and support, because otherwise educators are going to do what is being described in the chat. Why wouldn't they? Because
Mhm.
if there isn't support, they will have their heads cut off,
Mhm.
and they will lose their jobs, and they will have their licenses taken away by the state.
Mhm.
So we cannot allow any of those things to happen, and we have to figure out as a community how we're going to do that, and that's not an easy thing.
Mhm. I moderated a panel last year, a webinar. I think we called it Trauma in the Classroom. And we had several teachers from across the country speak about their experiences. And these were people, teach educators, and some of them long time, not, some were young, but a lot of them had, decades experience, were traumatized, literally traumatized. And it was just really, really sad to see. And they didn't know what to do. I mean, they didn't have the tools that they needed to do just to deal with their own emotional state, let alone teach. So it's real. And but I do think, as you said, Sumi, bringing people together and supporting them collectively is critical. Okay, we had one last question.
Yes,
Yeah,
last
yeah.
question. Matthew asked, he said, I've noticed a switch in how some organizations and politicians are targeting books and libraries. They're now using loaded language such as sexually explicit through all their examples, still targeting LGBTQ plus books. Has anyone had success in combating this new approach?
I actually put in there, it's in the chat, and I'll actually re-put it in there. There's actually a group called Movement Against Movement. Hold on, I'll give you the actual title. It is Movement Advancement Project. And basically it's ways to really kind of message and target things like the groomer attacks, and how do you support LGBTQ in a sense of understanding that it is not about the LGBTQ. This is a policy piece of it, and so I'll reinsert that in the chat. But that is a good resource to use to really kind of it goes through talking points, as well as how you approach legislators in a sense of really kind of how do you get people together to actually go and talk to legislators and get students ready to talk to legislators about changing policy.
Thank you.
I will just add a lesson from history, since I'm in the middle of teaching a civil rights class right now. And if you look back to the 1917 Barred Zone Act, which sought to bar pretty much immigrants from almost all of Asia, right? What it also did at the same time, using, ostensibly neutral language, right, was to also seek to bar LGBTQ people, persons, as they put it, with constitutional psychopathic inferiority, right? And so I guess I raised that just to point out how, language has been used in the past that may not on its face, be explicit, or try to bar, let's say, aliens ineligible to citizenship. But whatever that language is, we can see that it hides behind it, this other falsehood and defamation that's at the core, dehumanization, that's being designed to marginalize and exclude people, and that these things we often see hand in hand, that to eliminate people on the basis of race, sexuality, ability, and disability, etc., that all is of a piece with one another. So I guess that's just one thing to keep in mind, And
Mm.
don't forget that the rationale that Florida used to be age appropriate, they then completely undermined when they turned around and extended Don't Say Gay to all the way through high school, right?
Mm.
So you can see more clearly what's behind, this, discourse around parental rights is really just a purgation of being able to talk about LGBTQ people in the classroom.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you. Yes,
Do you-
John, I'd like to thank you again. Such a great job moderating today. Sumi, Trey, LaTayna, Dick, Peter, wonderful job on our panel. Again, we'll follow up with everybody with the recording and all of the resources. Kate and I have been furiously copying those into a document to send all of you as well. Thank you for joining us. We so appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Take care.
Hope to see you all next month.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.